Hello, I am so pleased to be here today with Peggy Swarbrick and Allie Middleton, and I'm going to introduce them to you in just a moment. But first, let's have a few announcements. First of all, so much gratitude to Give Back Yoga for helping us co-produce this podcast. And just keep in mind that you can join us anytime and come onto the podcast live with us and ask questions. They have a wonderful package that is $19 a month where you can come on all 4 podcasts for the month, as well as receive 2 other Give Back Yoga courses as part of that package. And so your money will be well spent for your learning, but also giving it forward to Give Back Yoga to help people who are underserved or undersourced, I like to say, receive yoga services. Something else I'd love to encourage all of you to do, if you're willing, is to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. So it can be a sentence, it can be a paragraph, but leave us a review if you're enjoying this, enjoying our show. I get a lot of personal notes through my website, but it's super, super helpful if you're willing to put that in the notes on Spotify or on Apple or Stitcher or wherever it is that you listen to the podcast. And our sponsor this week for the show is Optimal State Yoga Therapy School. And we have 13 approved professional development courses where you can earn CEs through the International Association of Yoga Therapists. So you have 13 different choices for APD credits, and we would love to share those with you. So that's on www.amywheeler.com. All right, let us get started. Good morning, Peggy. Good morning, Allie. How are you this morning?
Very well. Thank you, Amy. How are you?
I'm fabulous.
Good morning, Amy. Good morning, Allie.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi, Peggy. So I'm just going to introduce both of you to our listeners. This month of July, Allie Middleton has been so instrumental in helping us at this podcast get 4 very unique guests that aren't necessarily in the yoga therapy world, but they could help the field of yoga therapy push forward into new dimensions. And so Allie is really interested in building relationships with influencers that are in adjoining fields of healthcare. And she's also an expert in Theory U process and social presencing, which for those of you who don't know about Theory U process, it's a way to manifest things together, as you'll probably hear Allie say, from me to we, and to create the world that we want to live in. So Allie will be helping us do some social presencing today as we go through our talk. She's also a licensed psychotherapist in New York and a professional level yoga teacher and yoga therapist. And she has this fabulous new book called Yoga Radicals, a curated set of inspiring stories from pioneers in the field that's available on Amazon.com, where she interviewed, you'll have to tell us, Allie, is it over 25 or 30 people, and created these magnificent interviews about high-level people in the field, their work, and what they want to bring to the world. So do you want to say anything else about your book, Allie, before I introduce Peggy?
Not now. Thank you, Amy.
Okay. All right. And Peggy Swarbrick is a pioneer and global wellness leader from Rutgers University and the Collaborative Support Program of New Jersey. She has been a teacher and a researcher in the area of resilience and recovery for persons living with mental health, substance abuse, and trauma-related challenges to help them impact their quality of life and lifespan. Sounds a lot like yoga therapy, doesn't it? She is an avid yoga practitioner, got very serious about her practice since 2014. And one of the really cool things that Peggy is going to bring to our conversation today is this model that she kind of brought to behavioral health in the 1980s called the 8 Dimensions of Wellness. And it sounds a whole lot like the Panca model, or the 5 dimension or 5 layers of the human system, how we can bring balance and coherence and salutogenesis to our lives. So there's a lot of overlap there. And Peggy's going to talk to us about the long road from really having it come to the behavioral health community. This 8 dimensions of wellness came to the behavioral health community in the 1980s, and it got really, really popular, and people started talking about it more in 2011. And I just want to point out that, that's a 30-year span. And Peggy has been kind of just walking the walk for 30 years or more, just doing the work to get the 8 dimensions of wellness into behavioral health. And to me, that's really important, because so many people in the field of yoga therapy don't even realize that our field is only about 15 years old, really, as a profession. And some could argue that even most of that time we weren't a true profession, because we didn't have educational standards. We don't yet have a licensing exam. So we're just this little baby working our way into the field, healthcare field. And yet so many are impatient and not willing to let the field unfold. So I think Peggy will have a lot of wisdom for us to help us see how long it really takes to get these types of wellness concepts into the field of healthcare. So welcome, Peggy. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Great. So I think we'll start with you, Peggy. I would like to hear your story about the 8 dimensions of wellness and how it is you came upon it, how you started to implement it, and if you even want to tie in some of the ideas that you're passionate about with trauma, addiction, recovery, resilience, we'd love to have you tell us that story.
So really, like I said, in the 80s, when I really, the idea came to me actually in the 70s, but that personally, and started my own journey of recovery, which was being impacted very young in my life. And as I started to get into the field and work, I was actually got training, eventually, thankfully made it into school after a very rough start of young adulthood. All those challenges, was mentally, physically, socially, spiritually challenged. Started to, work on my own recovery, eventually became an occupational therapist in the field, and I worked in mental health. So I was really bringing my lived experience of my own little bit of a journey to my occupational therapy setting, working at a very large state psychiatric hospital where we needed wellness. And the people in those settings and the staff loved it. Wellness, I was starting to talk again. At that point, it wasn't the 8 dimensions. I had about 5 that we had mapped out at that point, because of course you didn't talk about spirituality in a state psychiatric hospital. You would have got medication hit at you. So we really just basically started to work on using that framework in my work as an occupational therapy. And I really evolved it in that work, running groups and helping to self-empower people, and using this framework for people to see physically, spiritually, socially, intellectually, occupationally, environmental, financial. And again, we started early 5. And then as I evolved my work and started to build my own wellness and started to move outside a little bit of OT into more doing other things in the mental health field and research and program development, started to look at those the factors of financial and environmental and some of these areas that needed to be added to see people holistically. So this model became a framework for helping people to look at their needs, look at where they were. And it wasn't perfection. It was about finding this balance, but paying attention. It really helped us to pay attention. And it was very well received. It got more received well through the peer recovery movement, the movement that came about around that same time that I was in a state hospital. There was a community movement, people in recovery, which I then eventually got connected with, that started to be people, particularly people who had been users of the services or recipients of services that were wanting to make things better for themselves and trying to transform the mental health system. So that, and this was people in mental health, and this, parallels in the recovery addiction movement, started to bring this forward. And again, there in the wellness model was more accepted in those spheres, but then probably initially 2011, it really got national more recognition, but that also traced back to 2007, when on a national level, and then again into 2008 and through on, there was a recognition of this lifespan disparity. People were finding that people by dying 25 years before the general population, people with mental health and substance use served by the public mental health system started to focus on the physical. So I was invited to these circles because I'd been doing some work. We were going to only focus on the physical initially, but we all said it took about 3 or 4 years for them to like really be okay with, okay, we're going to go to 8 dimensions rather than just blame and shame people for being smoking and doing these physical things, which were important. We're going to see people holistically. So eventually what happened was the model and the work of developing programming around these dimensions for people and, was more acceptable. And it started to become you would see state mental health authorities starting to adopt the focus. Federally funded projects were being being able to be funded and also further developed, as well as managed care companies. Even actually, I've done a lot of work with managed care companies who are accepting this because it made common sense. We're seeing people person-centered, it's holistic, and it really helps us to have a way to frame looking at people, not just the mental health challenge, not just the substance, what's happening with the trauma. Usually there's all three. But the wellness model helps people to see themselves from the strengths, see the challenges, but then help the person to come to an awareness of the balance that's best for them through activities. Yoga being a major activity that I found even way back in the 80s, people would talk about yoga and mind-body strategies that would help them with their mental and emotional well-being. And I think the wellness model for us thinking about yoga therapy is a wonderful way to see yoga practices or people learning. It can help people mentally, physically, socially, spiritually. It has a lot of impact on the various dimensions of wellness. And so the story of, it took a while to come about. It took us looking at the lifespan disparity, people dying, and thinking about ways of improving the lifespan and the quality of life. But the biggest messages was persistent. I kept bringing it forward, getting like-minded people to be interested in it, and then getting people at all levels of government and all levels of, even researchers, not as much. I mean, there's researchers even as well. That's definitely an area for improvement in our work, but that's just a little bit of a snapshot. And it was just because something I use personally in my life, and I continue to use that model.
So this is such a perfect moment just to take a gander, to take a glance, and to listen in to this personal lived experience of Peggy Swarbrick. And alongside of many others, Peggy, you have supported the development of innovation from your own personal journey. And the fact that it's taken this amount of time, for those of us who are practitioners, that's an incidental detail. And it's more about the quality of your practice and how you lifted up from your own leadership this emerging future, right, that has happened in the behavioral health community. And it's been such a delight to know Peggy. Those of you who are watching, we used to wander around conferences together, each of us telling our stories, me implementing yoga-based practices in community mental health centers and psychiatric hospitals. This is back in the 90s. And when Peggy and I used to bump shoulders, and she'd be there with her model, and I'd be there with the stories of well-recovered psychiatric patients who were telling stories of their vocational recovery and their housing recovery, their relationship recovery, and this moving into a community model of shared well-being is what I'm hearing Peggy really bring to life. And the thing that I'd like to invite us all to do right now as we listen in during this month is to remember that we have all been through similar qualities of threshold moments of whether or not we'll go to the cushion, whether or not we'll go to the mat, whether or not we'll actually have the compassion with ourselves to take that next step toward a new idea. And so Peggy told us so beautifully, spinning her wheel, these 8 dimensions of wellness. And if you were to look at your own life now, even though you might not think of yourself as an emerging leader, the yoga therapy and the extended embodiment community is going to be the rootedness of our shared global health. And the fact that not everybody kind of gets that yet is one of the ways in which we get to admit and actually welcome our shared humanity. So part of what this moving from me to we journey is that Peggy and the others during July of 2021 are sharing on Amy's podcast is to remember that we're all in this together. And so as Peggy shared, and I'll ask a deeper question here, Peggy, when you knew in yourself that you had something that you really wanted to offer to the world, and that you had relationships that mirrored and matched your desire for your own wellness, what was it that made the difference, that gave you courage and compassion for doing something difficult or that you were afraid of?
Well, I just knew that it worked for me, and I saw it working for so many other people. And I also felt that it was just such an important, I was just really, there's a lot of things out there that I'm not going to name those things that were being very toxic to people, and very much even at way back when, knowing that this was probably shortening their lifespan or might have shortened my lifespan in the environment sometimes people were in. I just knew this was the right thing. And I was probably considered kind of kooky or a little whatever. And that I have back then, now it doesn't bother me somebody say that, probably was upsetting a little bit there, but I didn't let it upset me or stop me. I was
Right,
like, hey, I'm going to keep
right,
the right thing.
right. So this is where the body comes in so beautifully when we actually sustain a practice. And when I listen to you, I think of your spinal alignment and the stories that you told me when you were encountering, I think it was a relationship with someone and there was some death in your family. And when we actually remember that we can stay and then continue to create, even when we have these beliefs or ideas that things shouldn't be the way they actually are, that is one of the psychological as well as physiological benefits of practicing yoga. And so knowing that you were a systems change artist, right, making the capacity for SAMHSA, which is the federal organization that monitors and manages mental health and substance abuse services for states, those of you who are listening, and localities like a county or a town can adopt freely these qualities in a step-by-step way. We call them technical assistant plans. And Peggy's model, the 8 dimensions of wellness, became one of the most well-accepted ways in which to offer a new idea out into the world. And it allowed people who didn't have any training to learn together what it was to adopt a new program. So from the perspective, Peggy, of this analogy of the yoga therapy world coming into its own, and you being one of the major rooted ones in helping the wellness movement come into behavioral health, what would you suggest people to think about when they have a new idea or they feel that it's right, that quality of integrity, like you said, as a leader?
Well, I think it's putting it out there in different ways, sharing it in different ways. Like you said, your conferences here and there. I started to write about it, publish about it, put it into different ways. But I think that, and the way I think that it worked for me to get it out there was like, I think it landed for people. It landed. It
Mhm.
wasn't just those people with serious and persistent mental illness over there. It's the we. This affects we, and that person over there isn't so much different from me. And if maybe they have these opportunities and someone helps them with their wellness, they may not be in that label category over there. So I think it spoke to people who, many people in this field and any kind of healthcare, are there for reasons, and when they can apply it for themselves. And that was the biggest thing I did in my work, is I try to help people see, let this land for you. I'm not going to tell you how it lands. If you think 12 dimensions are needed, go add your 3, you know, 4 that you need, like people would say that to me. So those are the kind of reasons, that
Yeah.
ways I think it became very intuitive, and it wasn't people, just it landed for people more than I ever realized how it could land for people.
So, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So, just honoring the integrity of your own intuition is what I hear you speaking to, and the potential that others might share your same care for feeling well from the inside out. And so, these interoceptive, proprioceptive capacities, the ways in which we're moving into understanding more how the nervous system responds as an individual, but now more and more as groups of people. And in our earlier conversation, you spoke about the current social stress that this corona time has placed upon society. And I'm wondering if we might move now relative to sharing the care for community well-being, knowing that you led the way in the behavioral health community with your 8 dimensions, but now with the yoga therapy world beginning to come alive more explicitly with body-centered and mind-body integration practices, what's the opportunity for a yoga therapist starting out today while we learn how to live together after these last year of self-sheltering and the stresses that people have experienced?
Well, I think there's lots of pain and suffering and a lot of healing needed. So I think finding places and spaces in your own communities where you can approach your local hospital, your local places. That's what local and then larger. So wherever you can, and have a group of people doing the variety, but start where you are. And I think when we talk about mental health, we talk about prevention, treatment, and recovery supports. I think that yoga therapists some people might be more into the prevention model of how do we work on people who need more on the focus of the prevention. There's a lot of people who need things in the treatment realm, and then there's the long-term supports or the self-management. So I think as yoga practitioners, thinking about where you best feel like you fit, because you're not going to go to all of them. One area or another, or maybe 2 areas might be better fit. I think you find the opportunities. Healthcare workers are traumatized. It's not even PTSD. It's beyond, because it's continual. There's recognition in these settings by administrators. So approach them as programs you can offer, or going out and do your marketing to them, because they need employees that are well, and they're not well right now, and they're not going to be well for a while. So they need consistent resources that are going to help boost and buffer their workforce to be well. So even just thinking about from a employee health piece in the healthcare settings, and then there's plenty of populations that need this, with substance use, mental health, and other trauma issues.
And
Yeah, that's
Allie,
perfect. I can actually give a personal example that might be useful for people, Amy and Peggy. This is, actually a good 10 years ago, after the community mental health experience that I had as a clinical director in a 2-county, 500 family setting, bringing yoga therapy, yoga research using a diversity grant from Kripalu. And when that became the story that I told in the psychiatric rehabilitation community, blending mind-body practices with the recovery practices that Peggy's speaking to, the wellness setting, I got invited to go into the state psychiatric hospitals because exactly what Peggy was saying, the staff had not adopted yet this more balanced way of working with folks recovering from psychiatric emergencies. And they were not living and learning and working and relating according to the new mandates of program development. And so, as a yogi and as a yoga teacher, I was asked to blend staff yoga programs with inpatients so that we could begin to have a different dialogue about how to co-create wellness and recovery programs together. Those were probably the most fruitful learning experiences on the ground that I had that began to enable this more embodied leadership journey that I've been on, which I'll talk about another time. But it's something that each and every one of us can move toward. And the analogy is, if you really like the flavor of somebody mirroring what you love in your practice life, and they say, I have another idea, can we try that? That's what embodied innovation is all about. And that's why we have to do these iterative experimental tryouts that Peggy talked about, and that I'm sure Amy has many stories about as well. So that's where I'll leave it, Amy. And it might be a good idea now, perhaps, to understand this coaching and counseling contrast.
I want to pause there for a minute because I feel like what we've already talked about, I just want to summarize it, is profound. That we start from the heart of what is alive in us and what we are passionate about. And we do it because it's alive in us and we're passionate about it. We don't do it to get somewhere. We don't do it to become famous or to take over behavioral health. What I heard Peggy saying is she did it because it healed her. And that was enough. And I think so many of us in yoga therapy are so eager to get somewhere, we're forgetting where we are. And my premise, and especially after meeting Peggy, is do what's in your heart. Be with what is in this moment, and good things will happen. Like that's all. If we all just did that, the field of yoga therapy would blossom. It would have so much prana, so much life force pushing it forward, because that is so potent. And then the second thing that I kind of want to summarize, just because I think it's so powerful, is that maybe one of the best ways to move ourselves into the healthcare systems is through the employees. That's the buy-in, because they have to experience it. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to go in to a yoga therapist, either in a small group setting or individually, and feel something shift inside you. As a healthcare worker, the healthcare worker will naturally want to share that and bring it in for everyone else too. And I think a lot of times, I'm not saying yoga therapists should go work for free, but to do a session for free for the staff so they can have that experience, and don't make it just a lecture. You can lecture 15 minutes, but 45 minutes of experiential in your body feeling is what's really what I've seen shifts people. Do you want to say something, Peggy? I saw you kind of lift a finger.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm going exactly what you're saying. Yes.
Great. And then the last thing I want to say before we go into this amazing thing that Allie was just mentioning between coaching and counseling, that Peggy has a lot to teach us about. Recently, I heard at the SITAR conference, the Symposium for Yoga Therapy and Research, which we have once a year in June, Lori Fazio was one of the speakers, and she said that the fledgling field of physical therapy was just kind of hanging out until polio came along. And it was polio that launched physical therapy into being a real profession that was respected. And there was educational standards and testing and licensing and all of that. It was launched because of polio. And what Lori said, and I agree with her, is that COVID-19 could be that for yoga therapy, because a lot of the burnout conditions that healthcare workers and everyone else is feeling, the anxiety, the depression, the trauma from COVID-19, the acceptance of loss and death, as well as, the long hauler syndromes that really seem very connected to digestion and the nervous system, where yoga therapy is really great at working with those, as well as the respiratory system. Yoga therapy is perfectly positioned to help with COVID-19. And it's my hope that something good can come from this mass tragedy that we've all been experiencing. And that is to launch yoga therapy just the way that PT was launched because of the tragedy of polio. So, Allie, I'm going to pass it back to you and have you ask Peggy some questions about coaching and counseling and how that pertains to yoga therapy and what we can learn.
Thank you, Amy. And what comes to mind first, Peggy, is this shift of power that happened when the recovery and psych rehab movement became well accepted. And to remember that the leadership journey that the yoga therapy field is on allows for this more holistic communitarian group process of development versus someone having knowledge that others need to get, right? This top-down learning. And I wanted to ground it more in this psychosomatic model of inside-outside capacity building, and the way in which the peer leadership journey might be a model for yoga therapists to understand how the shift of power from telling someone that they need to use their body or to meditate more isn't going to be the way in which change might occur successfully, but rather there's this exemplar idea, this demonstrated capacity through projects, programs, experimentation. So can we really roll it back to those early steps on your leadership journey and begin to help the yoga therapy community stretch the canvas wide so that each of these places and spaces, from this idea of how do we prototype so that it's successful enough that people listen. And if we have the research base that's already starting to be well known around pain management categories, emotional and wellness, what are the more systems-based strategies that you might share with us that help us move into a we consciousness at the yoga therapy level as we become a bona fide profession? And if that gets too complicated, what is it that changed into a coaching model versus a counseling model, right? This inside outside, this balance of power that we need to manifest as more whole people, whole systems development.
So the idea that in terms of trying to get at kind of think about where it started at, so many things to think about where it is. The one thing that I can say to just in general about the approach is make it simple in a certain way. Have a simple message that not everyone, that people could come forward with. I think that was one of the things with the wellness that became a way that it landed with, as I use the word landed, was that it was made it simple enough that it could be understood by people. And then the image is there, but then addiction and mental health, how does this fit with children? You can then tailor the message in your engagement with people around it, but have a simple, clear, focused message. That I think that would be one of the strategies that I think helped for making this accessible for people. So having that clear, simple message. And I think then, like I said, and knowing that, again, the way I approached it, I've evolved these things, but it lands in different communities in different ways. So we have to be mindful, I can't be like, well, it should look like this or that. You we have to be open enough that we can adapt it to different groups in different ways. And I think that's when you're doing your approach of a marketing or trying to get it out there, be mindful of that in a way. And I think another piece of it is just learning. I evolved this a lot from the voices of people. And so that's why I don't really take the full credit in a certain way, because this was voices of many people. So have to keep our egos kind of checked
Yeah.
and
Right.
be mindful of that.
So clarifying question then, Peggy, if yoga therapy is really becoming known as a lifestyle management system, right? The ways in which we address the different models of intervention across these very specific areas, considering the 8 dimensions. Talk to us, please, about the difference between counseling and coaching as it relates to what you've learned in peer leadership development. What's the role shift there in terms of a lifestyle system of care that's well?
Well, it's the idea is, again, in the coaching model, I think that it's probably aligned well with yoga, is understanding that the person is their own expert and having that knowledge and working from that premise. And that's a very big piece that I think sets it apart and helping people to work in using more of that person-centered focus. Also, again, you want to figure out where people are, use tools and strategies to help figure out where people are with things to help guide them, rather than telling them or directing and being too directive. I guess that's a bit of a difference in the model, and that aligns the coaching aligns more with the yoga therapy approach. And I think the piece that really makes it, I think both might help people with goals, but goal directed. I think they're both in a sense goal directed, but I think the strategy around how do you get to that goal and how do you help support a person with the goal and coaching is a little bit different in a sense, because again, it goes guided back to the person. And again, the other piece that I think is important that doesn't happen necessarily, I think there are therapies and counseling that do experiential things with people, but I think the yoga therapy will be has a lot more of that. And I think, as it was mentioned, experiential, like doing the classes with us, the employees at the hospital, people experiencing it and making that, trying things out, learning things is another piece within coaching. Like it's not going to be perfect the first time, and perfection is defined by the person, and perfect is not the goal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're reminding me of when I offered a training, so to speak, to psychiatric facility directors who were trying to create psychiatric rehabilitation programs. And they were used to the old model of, take the pill and don't come back unless you've got another symptom. But when the groups were beginning to realize it wasn't helping them feel better at work or feel better in their teams when people had these chronic, repetitive issues, the ways in which we moved together, doing just simple standing poses, and then offering what Amy mentioned at the beginning, understanding what it feels like to presence, to actually sense and be present together as we help make change in either a system or a small group. And that quality, which is really the intelligence of the heart, which is at the basis of these more dynamic inside out learning strategies, yoga therapy falling into one of those categories. When that lived experience, when that shared live experience comes into a group, simply noticing what's not said sometimes becomes the beauty of connection. Simply noticing what's not said, and that we actually share a felt sense of being well together. We don't need to do anything. And that mindfulness in the body as it lands us into this place of potential is the creative word that I like to use, always includes other people, right? So we can't do it alone. So this cross systems fertilization that we're talking about with you this morning, And your suggestion that people go and develop relationships, Amy, with employee groups who are struggling with managing employee wellness, and the ways in which yoga therapy, the research base on it, begins to open a new conversation. So those are more leadership development strategies. The thing, Peggy, though, tell about one of your favorite challenges. When did something really, really go down the tubes, and what did you do?
You know, with implementing the wellness approach in different settings.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I don't see, I probably at another time would have had it like this was the war story and it was horrible, but I probably am in a different place, probably because of yoga, that it doesn't sound like like it wasn't it's not a struggle for me, because it probably was always early on a pretty deep, long story I would tell you about that made me lose sleep at night. But I don't have memory of that anymore because I'm actually like I just feel like I'm so much at a different place in my life, especially because of yoga and other things, because I don't have those things in my head right now because I feel like everything was a reason, even if there was a lot of shit, which a lot of shit happened. I and I think at the time, even if I had to struggle with it, that was fine because I got through it and I kept it in, like I said, said in my heart, kept moving it along. So that persistence is important.
So I put my hand on my heart as I hear you, because when we as yoga practitioners or any other kind of embodiment practitioners rely upon our consistent commitment to practice, that's what I hear you actually inviting us to remember is the most extraordinarily strong and reliable root of our shared journey. And that's this dreaming of the new world into being, because we're not going back, right? We're trying to create some new forward momentum with some mindfulness based upon our lived experience from the inside out. And yes, how would I say this for myself? Well, it actually points to the book. Wait until the stories actually unfold in the book. The narratives of these 36 yoga innovators from all over the world, those who are from lineage holders and those who are sitting in the barrio in LA, have gone through those thresholds, those very, very specific, they're esoteric at one level, but they're very embodied noticings at another level. So that quality of being, Peggy and Amy, is part and parcel of this new time that we're living into. And even as I sit here and say that, I welcome this additional responsibility on the yoga therapy community to help the workforce who are caring for this long haul thing that still we don't know about enough.
And not only the workforce, we think about all the responders, all of it. Go to the grocery stores, the grocery store workers were like they were the ones on the front line when people, go to other community settings, because that's the prevention. Think about prevention, other places and spaces in your community where you can go and offer, and you don't know. And there's a lot of resources coming in to the states for programs. So get cued into that. There is a lot of money coming down the pike. And that's where you can offer a program and it would fund your implementation of that program to just pilot it and try it out.
Peggy, I just want to jump in here because we as yoga therapists know that COVID-19 wreaked havoc on people's ability to breathe well, their immune system, their digestive system, their nervous system. And we actually have the research to show that yoga can help all those different systems of the body. But I think what our listeners would like to hear from you, you say there's going to be a lot of money coming, probably to deal with COVID long hauler syndrome. And all the effects of anxiety. I mean, it's an epidemic now of mental health because of COVID. Where would people even begin to tap into finding ways to get funded?
go on your state mental health authority websites, and they should be posting all that. Go to the SAMHSA website. The SAMHSA website and the federal websites have listed the monies that have been allocated. It's already allocated stuff, and I'm sure more. So you go onto those sites and then find out, they'll have RFPs, requests for proposals, that will be written. But this is where you might want to also be partnering with a local mental health, a local hospital, because they're going to be the ones, and then they could apply for the money. You may not, I'm not sure, it's mostly going to, the different ways it will get funded. You might get funded through that hospital, through that mental health. A lot of mental health places are really looking for things right now to offer different innovative programs. So yeah, just keeping cued into those settings.
So like I have a place down the street called Mountain Counseling Center. I could just walk in there and be like, hey, here's what I do. I'm a yoga therapist. Here's all the ways I think I can help you. I know there's grants out there that you're probably better at writing a grant than I am as a yoga person. Do you want to team up?
That's exactly.
It's that simple.
And then as a group too, people should be sharing your proposals of how you're framing it out. So you're doing similar. So you have your little, you have your 2-pager, 1-pager, come up with a couple of pagers, share them with each other, give each other feedback, and you tweak them to your community if it's a different community, but you have the prototype of a little bit of an outline for how to, propose it, and even have the flyer ready, you have it all.
That could be something that the IAYT, International Association of Yoga Therapists, could come up with. I'm sure they love me giving them work, but that they could have available as a kind of a benefit or a service to all of their 6,000 members.
That's
right?
the best way to move forward, is to move forward together. Peggy, your suggestion is really important, that the templates about why yoga therapy helps, and to link it to the known symptoms that the public healthcare system isn't able to treat yet. Those are straight line collaborative frameworks that would not be a lot of work to put together. And I bet Amy Wheeler has a lot of people who she could call upon to do that as a shared group, to model the capacity building for yoga therapists in this long haul situation.
There's also, Ali, we can give them that Pathways to Enhance Wellbeing resource we developed that might have some good language.
Yes, we'll do that. That'd be great.
And I want to add that I think the yoga therapy community, through Give Back Yoga, they're doing a partnership with IAYT to do just this. Rob Schwer and his team, they have a whole program. They have the verbiage written about long hauler syndrome and how yoga can help. So I think it's done. We just need to get it out there and connect it to these community organizations and let them know how we can be of help. Another organization is the one that Heather Mason has been working on in the UK, just had a huge online conference about yoga therapy and COVID-19, with thousands of people and doctors interested in how to connect what yoga therapists can do with the actual needs of the people. So I think the ground roots effort is actually happening right now, which is so exciting.
So using Peggy's inspiration, that's really lifting what you did, Peggy, in the 8 dimensions into a similar way for the yoga therapists right now. That would be exactly just a beautiful bookend for the yoga therapy community to learn the how to implement a mobilization strategy.
And not only for the long haulers, I think you want to remember there's all other people in society that we can be thinking about. A lot of the people in so many different spaces, and especially with the racial and ethnic disparities, I would hope that there could be attention to some of the significant amount of healing that needs to happen, given what's happened in the last, thankfully we've been away, we have, not thankfully, there's been so much recognition, and we need to be thinking about that healing, because it's really, there's the opioid epidemic and all the other addictions, there's the COVID, and then there's our racial reckoning, and that whole syndemic really that's occurring is it's a storm that's not perfect, it's an opportunity to really help some healing on many levels.
I love that, Peggy. And what I'm getting from you in this conversation is that you did have obstacles, you did have roadblocks. It was hard, but it didn't mean you stopped doing what you were doing, because there was something deep inside you that knew this 8 dimensions of wellness had helped you, and it had potential to help others in whatever form they wanted to manifest it. I love that part, to kind of allow other people to take it and apply it to their situation. But just because it's been a hard journey over the last 30 to 40 years doesn't mean you stopped. You just kept moving forward from your heart, doing your thing, doing your yoga. Do you want to say anything else about that?
No, I think it's just a persistence and a belief that it really can be a way to help. I see it's like the glasses I put on, it's the circles. We have to keep the circles. That's what I like about the circles. It helps us to keep, especially that focus, and helps us to focus. And it's just been a good way. And I think I'm so excited that you're really yoga. Like I said, I used to hear about it for years. It helped people. I read about it. I did would always be promoting for other people, but then to know it really does make amazing work. I'm so excited that the field is going to continue to move forward. As a parallel, I was an occupational therapist. We had a lot of similar kind of struggles. There's also some parallels. You might want to look in the OT field too, as well, the lessons learned there. But that too, the field of OT, I think, was a persistence. And I think there's some parallels there in the way OTs diversified the top populations that it serves, that has made that field also expand. So I'm really grateful to be here to talk about this today, and thank you.
I think that's so important. This is one of the messages I had, I think it was 2017 or 2018 as president of IOIT, that if we only stay as kind of a luxury item for middle class to wealthy white women, this field is going nowhere. That we actually need to get down on the streets, in the schools, in the hospitals, in places where maybe people don't think they even need yoga, and diversify and really start serving many, many different populations, because that is how we are going to spread the word of what we can do. So I'm really happy to hear you reflect that back. Allie, we have about 6 minutes left. Do you have any last questions for Peggy, or any last words of wisdom that you want to kind of highlight today?
Thank you, Amy. And Peggy, it's thrilling just to experience the mirroring and matching of your personal journey into your system's implementation, right? That is the moving from me to we. And when we do approach the need for health equity, right, from this perspective of what are the many, as you did it, the many lenses through which we see, feel, and sense this world that's gone through such turbulence and will continue, that the health and wellness of those who are willing, right? This is this collective will concept from the presencing perspective, that it is about the how we move forward together, and that it's not just one group that has the power to harness the forces of these practices for the sake of global well-being. There has to be a different dialogue, the way in which we've had in the behavioral health community over these so many years, to actually witness together that we all belong. And that quality of deep grounded sitting in your own body, and then realizing that we can move together as a shared collective body, has a lot to do with our mental capacity to witness these many dimensions that we do in our yoga models, and that what you brought forward in the 8 dimensions of wellness. So I just like to bring that quality of constant movement that we know the universe is always in, but also that willingness to stay very focused on what we know from our own inside out journeys to be true for us. And then to spend the time to really look around and say, who else is actually willing to go on this journey together? And so this shared path of global well-being across the multiple disparities first comes from our own personal practice. So I guess final question, we could all mention this, Amy. What is it, what is it that you really love in your daily practice right now that keeps you really rooted, but also inspired? Remember, the yogi thing is that we're, the bridge between these capacities. And so what is it that you do to continue to have your aspirational creative self very alive, but also your grounded self very alive? Just to share a personal practice with our listeners. And then I'll do the same. And Amy, would you do that too? It'd be fun.
Well, why do you go first?
I'll go. Okay. Yeah. So what I love to do on a daily basis is to really honor listening in the morning to whatever sounds are coming into my being, just at that moment of waking up. And that as I do my body scan and I begin to realize, oh, is it a seated practice morning or is it a movement practice morning? I begin to listen to the universe, right? And that's the quality of consciousness around this reciprocal nature that we're living into in this moving from a me to we, from ego to eco consciousness. So it's that generative listening practice that then directs my attention to what is the actual practice, a seated or a movement that I'll do first. That's my listening. And just to be a little silly, because I like to be silly, because that's what creativity comes from, it's all about the birds. I can identify these bird sounds. I've been learning to identify how the wind moves differently through different trees. So that quality of very explicit knowing from nature, big N nature, that's my practice.
And for me, I mean, I have a lot of different things, but trying to think about one thing that just to share of practice that helps me, especially it started in the pandemic in a sense, is at certain intervals, I just go turn the light off in the office I'm at. I have a mat right next to me by my space. And I just, because I'll fall over it if I walk over it, go turn the light off. And just at intervals during the day, it's been a practice that has helped significantly for me. So it's something I do pretty well each day. And as you said, I just do what it helps me to know what I need to do in my practice. And but just I need those cues and I need to delete the stimuli.
Mm. Mm.
And I would say something I've really been working with the last 6 months is I imagine that there is a light inside of this current form of Amy, how she's showing up in the world. And I imagine or connect that to the eternal Amy, the one that's always been here, will always be here. Maybe you want to call that your Purusha or your soul. And then I try to connect that to the eternal ocean of souls that we're all working together to create goodness and kindness and benevolence and assistance, compassion for all of us together. So connecting the light inside me to the eternal light of Amy, to the global lights, all of us together. And that's really been a beautiful, it takes about 15 minutes to kind of go through those levels. And I think it goes really nicely, Allie, with what you've been talking about today, moving it from the me to the we. So that I think is a perfect place for us to finish up today. And I want to thank Peggy and Allie for coming together with me today to share these ideas. I think they're so critical. I hope people listen more than once to this podcast because I think this is the essence of where the work needs to not just start, but stay. 30 years from now, this is still what we've talked about today. If we can do that as Peggy has over all these decades. And that's, you're really a yogi, Peggy, because you've stayed with your personal svadharma, your life purpose during hard times, during good times, because it felt good inside you and it's something you could bring to the world, and look where it took you. It's amazing. Do you have any last thoughts, Peggy?
I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, and I want to let all the listeners just really keep doing what is in your heart, has been said, and really understanding that what you give out comes back in many different ways, and will really help all of our healing. So thank you for all the good work you do.
Thank you. And Allie, you have the last word.
Let's just sit in silence together so that we can seal this offering, and to remember that we are connected through time and space, qualities of the heart.
Thank you so much, Allie. Thank you, Peggy. And we will say goodbye now.